Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today it is time for another year-end list for 2025. I've already done a list of my favorite albums, my least favorite albums of the year, and today I'm going for one that I feel like is not a category you really see that often in year-end lists, and that is the best albums that I discovered in 2025. So every album that I'm going to talk about today is not one that came out in 2025, but rather one I listened to for the first time. Since I feel like so many year-end lists have this massive focus on just the music that came out within that year. And so I just wanted to do one last year-end list to talk about all of my favorite music that I listened to in 2025 that was a first-time discovery for me. The eligibility for an album being on this list, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. It's just an album that I listened to for the first time in 2025 that didn't come out in 2025. And the only other rule is I'm not including any albums that came out in 2024 either, just since in the early months of 2025 I still did a lot of catching up on albums from the last year that I didn't get around to. So I have 20 albums to talk about today. I'm not going to go through them in any particular order. I think they're very difficult to compare to each other because they're obviously all so different. So I'm just going to go through them in the order I happen to have them on my list here. So with that, let's get started with the first pick, which is Sade's Diamond Life. This is simply just one of the most stunning and one of the smoothest pop albums I've discovered this year. And every time I come back to this album, and to be honest, pretty much any Sade album, but for some reason I just find this one to be my favorite. Every single time it's just such an amazing experience, and I feel like there are just so many levels on which I can appreciate the production and the sounds and the composition of this album. Not only just because of how smooth the entire thing sounds, but just in general, the writing and the performances are also absolutely fantastic. And even without the absolutely brilliant production, it would still be amazing, but that just manages to make it even better. Next, with him having released a new album in 2025, I really did get into JID, and by far my favorite album of his just has to be The Forever Story, as I think that the sheer consistency of this album manages to showcase his ability as a rapper absolutely perfectly, as well as showing off how fantastic of a lyricist he is too. Despite this album coming in at almost an hour long, I still think that every moment is absolutely essential to the album's progression, despite it still being one of the densest projects I've listened to this year. Somehow, JID has managed to put this album together in a way such that it never feels exhausting or tiring, despite how intense it can be at times. And already I think that this will absolutely go down as one of the most important and landmark hip-hop albums of the 2020s. One of my favorite metal discoveries of the year is definitely Agaloc's The Mantle. I did have a bit of a debate with myself as to whether I was going to do this one or Ashes Against the Grain, but I ultimately decided on The Mantle just because I think it's just a tiny little bit more consistent in my opinion. But having enjoyed the new Deafheaven album as much as I did, it definitely left me wanting to get more into black metal, given that it's a genre I never really explored all that much until quite recently. And to be fair, I know that I definitely haven't gone that deep with black metal yet. It's a genre I still yet to explore in that much more detail, but I still find Agalock to be an absolutely fantastic way in, and especially for this kind of time of year, their music suits the wintertime absolutely perfectly, especially having a very strong folk metal and very Nordic kind of influenced sound as well, which makes sense obviously given that's the part of the world that's famous for its black metal. I just think that on the whole, the way this album progresses, the absolutely stellar guitar playing definitely has to make it one of my favorite discoveries of the year. Next on the list, I have Freddie Gibbs and Madlib with Pinata. With Freddie Gibbs having released a new album this year, it definitely inspired me to go back and actually listen to all of the rest of his stuff. And this is by far my favorite of the ones I've listened to so far. Not only because obviously Freddie Gibbs is just an absolutely fantastic rapper, but then having Madlib doing the production side of things as well was just incredible. Just made for such an insane lineup for this album. With Madlib obviously just being one of the absolute best producers in all of hip hop, I think, and the way that they work together on this album is just absolutely brilliant, and it really does show how both of the main performers on this album are absolutely at the top of their game, as well as so many of the features also being amazing. I also want to take a moment to talk about Death's Symbolic. I think that Death just as a whole have to be one of my favorite discoveries of bands of the year, and this is absolutely my favorite album of theirs. This entire project is just so completely unhinged and so raw, and I just love everything about that. And even though there is an argument that it can be quite exhausting to listen to, everything from the vocals to the guitar playing to the absolutely insane drumming as well on this album is just absolutely top notch. And I think that this is absolutely Death at the peak of their career, despite how ridiculously consistent they are, as every single album of theirs I've discovered this year, and I love all of them. Also on my list, I have Ichiko Ayoba's Windswept to Aiden, which is one that, again, since she released a new album in 2025, it made me want to go back and properly listen to everything. And I'm so glad that I had a reason to properly get into her stuff, because this is just one of the most beautiful and whimsical experiences I've ever heard. Every song and every moment on this album is just so beautifully soft, and she really does just take you on such an incredible journey with so many amazing sounds and even some field recordings as well that I absolutely love to hear, and just the very aquatic and nature kind of vibe that this album has because of that is just absolutely fantastic. Next, I do want to talk about Diggable Planets with Blowout Comb. This, I think, is just one of the coolest and most fun and easy to listen to jazz rap albums I've ever heard. But at the same time, despite how easy it is to just stick on in the background and enjoy very casually, when it is something that you do really want to sit down and focus on, it manages to be great for that experience as well. As not only is there just so much going on the music side of things, just with the fantastic beats, the incredible vocals from three absolutely fantastic and super talented rappers, and that on top of also having absolutely fantastic, very conscious lyrics about lots of different social issues. And this, I think, is by far just one of the absolute best and most consistent hip-hop albums I've discovered this year. Another band I've loved getting into throughout 2025 has been Rush, and by far my favorite album of theirs definitely is Moving Pictures. This all around is just such an incredible progressive rock experience, with every single moment featuring some absolutely fantastic things to enjoy. I particularly love so many of the guitar riffs on this album that really go on for quite a while and in the best way possible, and you just get so much of an opportunity to really appreciate and absorb everything that's going on because of how long it takes. And because of that, this truly is just everything you could ever want out of a progressive rock album, as it really does reward you for listening through the entire thing and appreciating how much it manages to build. Next on my list, I have By the Time I Get to Phoenix by Injury Reserve, which I think is kind of an interesting one, how I did eventually get around to listening to this, because I've been into Injury Reserve for quite a while. I've been very familiar with a lot of their mixtapes and EPs and their debut album as well, but for some reason I just never got around to listening to this one until much more recently. And I did like a lot of their stuff, none of it necessarily blew me away, but I was so intrigued by how people described this one as being one of the greatest hip-hop albums of the decade and one of the most incredibly produced ethereal experiences out there. But when I did eventually get round to listening to this, I understood it immediately, as listening to this album is truly one of the most incredible experiences in music of the last few years, as it's just so beautifully atmospheric and still very experimental, but not in a way that at all makes it inaccessible. And I do really hope that Injury Reserve, now continuing on as By Storm, are able to kind of recapture what they had on this album and create something that is hopefully just as good in the future. Until quite recently, one of the biggest gaps in my personal musical knowledge was the fact that I had actually never properly listened to Prince, and so I decided to change that in 2025 and properly get into all of his stuff, and I think that I can confidently say that 1999 is my favorite album of his. This is simply just one of the best and most fun and most consistent pop albums I have ever listened to, and every single track on this project brings that absolutely amazing Prince energy that you would want out of an album of his. All of the very prominent influences from other genres like funk, disco, and synthpop just make this one of the best pop albums ever made, purely because of not only how amazing it is, but just its diversity and genre influence as well. Next up on my list, I have Miles Davis with Get Up With It. I have listened to a handful of Miles Davis albums in the past, and to be honest, jazz is a genre I really need to explore more. And it is one that I am actively working on, albeit quite slowly. But having discovered this album in particular, I think is definitely one of the highlights of 2025 for me, as this album really is an experience quite like nothing I've really ever heard before, with it being about 2 hours long, and the entire time it is just amazing, almost psychedelic jazz fusion, jazz funk, everything along those lines. And I just absolutely love the way this album progresses, the way it builds, and ultimately the way that it does progress I find to be so incredibly satisfying. And even though my bar for this isn't set very high, I can still confidently say that this is one of my favorite jazz albums ever. Next on my list is one that was one of my earliest discoveries of the year, which is Aquemini by Outkast. I'm not sure what it was that took me so long to get into Outkast, but I'm finally there, and I can confidently say that I absolutely love their stuff, and particularly Aquemini. This album initially did actually take quite a few listens to grow on me, as I initially did prefer others, but having got to know all of them really well, I think that this one definitely feels their most complete and their most well put together. I think it features some of their absolute best production, definitely some of their best songs, as well as just so much of the lyricism and the storytelling on this project being absolutely amazing. The next album I have on my list is The Seer by Swans. With Swans having released a new album in 2025, it did inspire me to, again, properly listen to all of their stuff. I had already listened to a handful of Swans albums in the past. To Be Kind is actually my favorite, but that wasn't eligible for the list because it was not in 2025 that I discovered it. But my favorite one that I listened to for the first time is definitely The Seer, as it still has a lot of the same things that I absolutely love about To Be Kind, just in a slightly different way. You obviously still have those very long, drawn-out songs, which I absolutely love. A lot of it is improvised as well, which is very cool. And I definitely find this to be one of their darkest and almost most disturbing and apocalyptic kind of albums. It is very much one of those that sounds a lot like how the album cover looks. Another discovery from 2025 that actually surprised me quite a lot how much I got into this album is Southeastern by Jason Isbell. And in fact, pretty much until I listened to this album for the first time only a few weeks ago, country was a genre I had a really hard time really enjoying and getting into. But I have heard quite a lot of good things about Jason Isbell, especially this album in particular, and so I did just decide one day that I wanted to listen to it. And I'm so incredibly glad that I did that, because it has led me to discover one of my absolute favorite discoveries of the year, as well as ultimately inspiring me to now try and discover more country, as it obviously is a genre that is more than just its stereotypes. I absolutely love how stripped back and simple so much of this album is. It really does make it feel so much more personal and intimate, as well as the absolutely fantastic and at times heartbreaking lyrics too. I've also recently really been enjoying a lot of La Dispute, particularly Wildlife being, I think, my favorite album of theirs. This really is just an absolutely fantastic emo and post-hardcore project, featuring some absolutely brilliant vocals that really kind of show the power and the emotion that goes into the genre usually, as well as some absolutely fantastic guitar playing all around. And as much as I've enjoyed many of their albums, especially their new one that they put out not too long ago, I just find this one to be their most consistent, their most well put together, and definitely featuring some of their most personal lyrics as well. 2025 was also the year that I moved away from using Spotify, just for many of the same reasons that many other people have as well. And having done that has finally given me the opportunity to properly be able to check out Joanna Newsom. And while I've fully yet to properly explore all of her albums in depth, the one I've enjoyed the most so far is definitely The Milk-Eyed Mender. This is just again such a fantastic and almost whimsical folk album that manages to be so complex despite its very simple sounding instrumentation. I think that her vocal style is so unique, and while it did take a while to grow on me, I feel like I absolutely love the way she sings on so many of these songs. And I think that her vocal style just really adds to the weirdness of her music, and in such a good way that makes it so unique and really quite like no other folk music I've heard before. The next album I have here on my list is Cosmogramma by Flying Lotus, which I think is just such an amazing and really interesting and unique electronic album, as this really is an experience quite like no other, with just how weird and unique it can be at times. I think that a lot of the influences on this album are absolutely incredible, particularly even the very subtle jazzy kind of moments that I absolutely love. I also like how each track on this album is so short and they all flow between each other so well, and each one I think is just a little bit unique and has something a bit quirky to it in its own way, and I think that they all fit together incredibly well despite that. As despite how different each song is, somehow they all manage to provide something unique that makes them all sound good as one collective piece. Also, over the last year, I've really been getting into The Infamous by Mobb Deep, which I have absolutely found to be just one of the most amazing and immersive hip-hop albums I've ever listened to, given how on this project, more than pretty much anything else I've heard, you really do feel like they are just transporting you onto the streets of New York, and it really does feel like that you are there living their experiences with them as they're talking about it. Not to mention the fact that both Prodigy and Havoc are both insanely talented rappers, and I think that it really helps that they're so good at what they're doing, even just on a musical level. It just makes this album all the more immersive. Another absolutely massive artist that until the last year I never actually properly checked out is Bob Dylan, but I finally in 2025 did a massive deep dive into his stuff, and that is why Blonde on Blonde is absolutely going to be making this list list of my favorite discoveries. I think that this being a double album was definitely very ambitious, but he pulled it off absolutely perfectly, as despite this being not only one of his longest and most dense albums, it's also just one of his most complete and most well put together, as it features some of his absolute best and most hard-hitting social commentary, but also has many moments where he really shows his wit in his lyricism as well. And finally, the last album I'm going to talk about today is Skinty Fear by Fontaines DC, who are a band that I've been meaning to get round to for a while, and having listened through all of their stuff throughout the year, Skinty Fear is definitely the album of theirs that has stood out to me the most. I absolutely love how dark so many of the songs on this album are, and the very strong gothic influence that it has is definitely one of my favorite things about it. The very big and heavy, deep guitar tones that they have match the very deep vocals perfectly as well, and there is just such an amazing heaviness to how dark this album can be at times as well. And I think that it really is the only Fontaines DC album that I can really say that about. As much as I do like the other three, I think that the fact that this album does have such a strong gothic influence ultimately does make it my favorite one. And so there we go. Those are the 20 best albums that I have discovered throughout 2025. Many of these were just artists that released an album throughout the year and it made me want to check out the rest of their stuff, and a lot of them are just ones I've been meaning to get around to for quite a while anyway. But all of these albums, as well as many other albums by the same artists, are all ones that defined the music I was listening to throughout the last year, and it does now have me really excited for all of the music I'm going to discover throughout 2026 as well, as I know there is still a hell of a lot I want to get round to, and a lot of it I probably don't even know exists yet. And I would also love to know what your favourite albums are that you discovered in 2025, so do let me know down in the comments below. And so thank you so much for watching this video. Please do let me know what you thought of these albums yourself. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.